You're listening to Gender, a Wider Lens.
I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States. Since 2016, my practice has been exclusively dedicated to gender questioning teens and families impacted by gender dysphoria.
I also work with gender questioning teenagers, and I facilitated support meetings for families and individuals who've been impacted by gender issues.
We're curious about the concept of gender and how it's unfolding in the wider culture.
Join us as we look at gender through a wider lens. Hi, Sasha.
Hi, Stella. How's it going today?
Good. Non-binary.
Yeah, we are going to be talking about non-binary identities today. And I don't know about you, but parents always ask me about this because they see their kids experimenting with different pronouns and names. And sometimes they'll see that a young person announces on their social media account that I'm non-binary. And parents are like, well, what is that exactly? So I think this is a really relevant theme in the culture right now. And I don't think we could talk about trans identities without talking about non-binary.
It almost feels like the symbolic word for this generation. It's a key kind of like when you're in this generation, you talk about non-binary in a very easy way, like my kids would. And it never before in our consciousness. And it really makes everybody over a certain age just feel old. It really does feel zeitgeisty.
Yes, definitely. So I guess we can start by saying that we're going to have a lot of analysis of what we think about this as therapists and as people who are kind of looking from that bird's eye view. But maybe we can start with, what do non-binary people say about themselves? What is this supposedly? What does it mean? So my understanding is that non-binary refers to gender identities for people who don't feel they perfectly fit within the box of being either a man or a woman. So they don't necessarily have any kind of, medical indications. Sometimes there isn't even gender dysphoria. I think sometimes it's just to indicate that I don't really like the label man. I don't really like the label woman, so I'm neither. What about you? Does that resonate?
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. I see it as a rejection. It's like, it's non-binary, but it makes me think of the French word no. It's like no to the binary. There's like niet. There's a kind of a complete like hands up, stop, no, I reject the binary. I reject the man, woman context, and I'm out. And remember in the 60s, the kids were, advised to tune in, turn on, and drop out. These kids are dropping out of the binary. They're not dropping out of school. They're not dropping out of college. They're dropping out of the binary. And, God bless them. You know what I mean? I'm always going to be for any rebel who says no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what they are doing. And I wonder myself, I've often wondered, where would I be? Where would I be if I was 15 and stuff like that? And I've always presumed I'd go for trans. But beyond that, I think non-binary would have been so attractive, as in a big fat no to all the generations before, to all science, to all biology, to everything. I'm saying no. No.
Yeah.
And me and my culture are saying no. And that's, to me, this is what it is. It's a counter-cultural, big fat no.
Yeah.
We're out. It's dropping out,
There's an element of protest. You're kind of rejecting the system. And I think what's fascinating is it covers such a broad range of experiences, as do all these things relating to gender. I mean, I say that a lot in many episodes, that you take one non-binary person and I'll show you 12 other non-binary people that are nothing like that person. It's really interesting.
You know the phrase, if you've seen one binary person, you've seen one non-binary person. There isn't norms very much within this. It's literally you do it your own way. Well, it's so interesting though that to me it's become much more common. It's much more common. Like it was referenced a few years ago, but in very short order, it's become almost the most common one.
So let's maybe talk about that because, in preparation, we pulled up some of those searches in Google Trends, right, to try and track the use of the term non-binary when it comes to people's internet use. And we found something, interesting, not shocking for anyone following this story, but the term non-binary was really not in use at all until maybe around 2014. So if you were to look at the graph of this in Google Trends, you see like a flat line on 0 all the way up until June 2014. You start to see it oscillating up and down. And then around 2019, it just kind of skyrockets. So I think this is really interesting and very indicative of what we're seeing on the ground, which is that, around 2015, 16, these identities really started to come into the consciousness, the main consciousness, especially amongst youth culture. And you see similar trends for other types of identities that indicate things like non-binary. So for example, gender queer or gender binary or gender fluid, all of those search terms are classified by Google as something called breakout terms. And when you see something called a breakout term, instead of a percentage of increase, it means that search term grew by more than 5,000%. And I find this really interesting because we know that in the UK, the gender clinics there saw a 4,400% increase in kids requesting gender services. So it seems to track, understandably, with the search term, including, it tracks between the search terms and the requests for actual assistance, mental health support, or medical support around gender identities.
Yeah, I wonder though, when I look at this, and I really advise people to go and look at it because it's such a shocking graph between the genderqueer and the non-binary, how it shoots in 2019 is extraordinary. And I kind of wonder, I know it was in the world by then, but why did everybody land on non-binary other than this is a protest vote? This is a rejection. I wonder, is there other reasons for this extraordinary opting out of the binary? Because that's what it is. They're basically saying you do man, woman, all you want. I'm not part of this.
Well, I think just like when we've talked about the symptom pool in our ROGD episode, once a concept enters into the culture and young people start sharing ideas with one another about that concept and discussing it and, listing its characteristics out, it starts to click, like I listened to several non-binary young people giving TED Talks or discussing their identities on YouTube, as we got ready for this episode. And when you hear them talk about it, it really feels relatable. Sometimes I don't feel like I really fit in with other girls. Sometimes I prefer these interests versus those interests. And if you understand those nuances as proof of being non-binary, then I get why it fits. I think these are probably terms that we are applying to things now that we didn't quite think about in a different way before.
Yeah, it reminds me, and I know we've discussed it between ourselves, that, when the philosopher Ian Hacking was talking about things like, symptom pools and, things like that, and he talked about the concept of making up people. And he said that there would be new cohorts arise when these phenomena happen. And then so making up people might be trans kids or things like that. But then the looping effect is like variations on these people always seem to, emerge. And the variation of that seems to have emerged is the non-binary. So it's the looping effect. It's like it doesn't stay static. When these new cohorts arrive, it doesn't stay static, and instead a kind of a new variation. And this is the ingenious new variation. That's my reading of what's going on here with the pool.
And Ian Hacking was studying kind of social contagions. Like, can you say a little bit more about his research? Because I think it really does apply with these kind of brand new labels that pop up.
Yeah, he's a brilliant thinker, and he kind of really dove deep into what happens when there's social contagion, and he talked about the symptom pool, and he talked about how culture, a phenomenon happens within a culture, and then it kind of distorts, and it kind of varies within that culture, and it spreads out and gets wilder and more kind of legs to the very same kind of entity. And this is exactly what's happened with the trans phenomenon. So when you read Ian Hacking, you just go, oh, I know all of this. Yeah. I know it all, Ian.
Yeah.
I was so excited about Ian when I first started reading about him. I thought I want to meet him, and I went to the bother of looking up. He's something like 82 or something. He's still in danger of me knocking on his door one day to say, Ian, I love his mind. I love the way he talks. I love what he's got to say,
Well, if you knock on his door, you'll have to bring your recording equipment, because I'd love to hear that conversation.
Yeah, there's fascinating thought. And this was way back, 80s, 90s, when people were discussing these issues, and then you apply the thought to today's phenomenon, and you see it fits so well.
Yeah,
that's how I understand it.
For sure. Well, I mean, I think it's important to kind of explore this issue, because I think non-binary identities often serve as a stepping stone onto transgender identity and also off of transgender identity, right? So if parents are seeing this, or if a young person themselves identifies as non-binary and is trying to kind of figure out, what does this mean for me? Where is this going? Where is this coming from? I think it's really valuable to note that for a lot of young people, it seems like a temporary intermediary between one place and another. And I'm assuming that there are other individuals who identify as non-binary, and that's kind of where they land and stay there for a while. But in my work, in consulting with parents and talking with young people, many kids start by saying, I think I'm non-binary, and then ultimately end up saying, I think I'm trans. And sometimes when people are desisting or detransitioning, they go to a non-binary identity and then go down to, not down, but they move on to their kind of natal sex identity. So it's really interesting the way it flows.
That's exactly my experience too. I know that's on N of 2, but still we have seen plenty of clients. And both a stepping stone in and a stepping stone out is a key kind of point. And the stepping stone in, it's generally viewed with slight roll eyes from the parents of kind of, the kid is just being a bit quirky. Oh yeah, non-binary. And the parents don't take it madly serious at that point. And then maybe the child goes into a trans identification, maybe for many years. And then just hypothetically, this child comes out and steps out with non-binary. By then, the parent can often feel very jaded and kind of, very kind of negative towards non-binary, and, not support what I would see as a good move, because there's fluidity, there's kind of, there's the flexibility has arrived, and I'm all for it. And the parents are like, it's just another gender identity. I can't deal with it. I can't support it. I've so had it. And I think something gets missed. I can see why it happens, but I think a lot gets missed at that point.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because, I think a lot of people roll their eyes at individuals calling themselves non-binary. And, look, I get that too, because there is something that can feel hard to understand, a little bit maybe wishy-washy, quote unquote. But I think there's something, again, if we hold it lightly and symbolically, really flexible about saying, I don't really fully relate to either of these categories. I think there's something valuable there. And if we can help a young person to hold that identity with a sense of curiosity, I think it's okay. And, I think what really troubles me, though, is that there seem to be a certain set of medical interventions that are now going along with the non-binary identity. So rather than it being this kind of freeing identity that, like, you get to dress however you like, you get to express yourself in any way, there's now, I think, almost a pattern being developed, which is, A lot of non-binary females think that they should have top surgery, which is a mastectomy, which is breast removal. And then they might believe that that physically helps them embody this neither or space. And that's troubling to me. And I've heard even gender clinicians advocate for medical intervention for, quote, non-binary kids.
Yeah. And I think there's a lack of thought with why would we medicalize the non-binary identity. I don't see any reason to medicalize the non-binary identity other than for cosmetic reasons, and they mightn't work out, if you follow me. And I think this is where it makes me feel very, very distressed that like there isn't enough thought going on here. Because if you say this person is non-binary and they want to take testosterone, it's like, okay, well, that's a decision. That has nothing to do with distress and everything to do with what they want to be. It's not quite the same as gender dysphoria. Well, it's not the same as gender dysphoria. It's something different. And I suppose it's just been nonchalantly categorized within the trans identity as well. If they want it, there you go, take it. And I think I think it's deeply inappropriate. And I think we've really kind of not given any respect to the people who are non-binary insofar as we've allowed it to be presumed to be a medicalized decision, when I don't think there's any really thoughtful analysis that could land at this is why it should be medicalized. I don't buy it. You know what I mean?
Well, given Ian Hacking's philosophy of making up like new categories of people, I'm not in agreement with this, but I understand what's happening is that there is a new category of person being invented, which is the non-binary person. And the non-binary person has implications for what, sex we're supposed to read them as. So if sex is, if sex is not binary, then maybe there is some hybrid version of, secondary sex characteristics. So like somebody with breasts and a beard, or somebody with a feminine face and no breasts. Like, I mean, this is Ian Hacking's theory come to life. Truly. This is literally making up a biological gender presentation to go along with a new emotionally, psychologically, culturally mediated identity, which is mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
It really is. It really is. And it's interesting. The reason why I'm sitting in front of you is because of non-binary, because I had my own experience as a kid. And then when I was, as I noticed trans kind of was more and more and more in the news. And then one day I was in a cafe in Birr and I was reading an article about a person called Corey Doty, who's non-binary, and Corey Doty gave birth to a child who they called Cyril Doty. And Corey went to the Canadian courts for the right for this child to be raised and recognised on their birth cert as U. And U stands for either unassigned or unknown. And so this perfectly healthy baby who, wasn't, didn't have a DSD, didn't have intersex condition. There was no issue around this child's biological sex, but the parents' ideology and reveling in non-binariness insisted on bringing up, as they call it, a baby. And when I read that, I just, everything inside me kind of, rose up as you can't inflict your ideologies and your beliefs on a little baby. I just had this image of a 9-month-old baby because the baby was 9 months when I was reading it, because it took some time for them to win. And, Corey Doty won. And so the child is you on their birth cert. And I have a very good friend who's very involved in birth certs. And, there was some terrible lies were written on birth certs in Ireland. Children were adopted and they weren't given the truth of who their actual birth was. And they were told, like, the birth certs, there was lies on it. So I feel very strongly that the birth cert belongs to the baby. It doesn't belong to the mother or the father. And therefore, it's not up to us to dictate what goes on the birth cert. This is a kind of a governmental certificate of your birth.
Yeah.
And so that's why, by the way, that was a very long intro. I wrote an article talking about what's going on in the trans world? Because things like babies are being kind of assigned you. And from that, I was offered to do the film. From that, I ended up meeting you. And that's why I'm sitting here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible, actually, because I mean, when I think about, stories where individuals were kind of lied to by their parents for a long time and then later discovered the truth about like who their real father is or where they were born, that's a shocking, traumatizing type of revelation. So I think it's very interesting that this non-binary activism in this specific instance actually was really like the rights of the parent to kind of lie about the child's sex. That's absolutely shocking. And I didn't really know. I didn't know about this story.
It's an extraordinary story.
Yeah.
So that child is you. And, I hope the child, thrives, and I hope the family thrives, and I hope everything goes well. But that the parent has the right to put you on that birth cert because of the parent's views struck me, literally propelled me out of the cafe and over to my house to write an article.
Oh,
it was
my God.
just, what is going on? This.
Yeah.
That's how I landed into it. Because I often wrote articles about mental health. And this was a little bit left field, but it just was like, hang on, I have to raise something here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it was. It's an extraordinary story when you step back from it, especially when you know about birth certs and the trauma of children being told this was your mother and it wasn't their mother.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, I know there's a court case certainly impending in the UK for a person who was born female at when they were a child. They were born female and became, a trans man, and is now, fighting for the right for the child to have two fathers, let's say, as opposed to a father and mother, or two mothers. Do you understand me? Mm-hmm. And that's on the birth cert, like two mothers, let's say, or two fathers. And again, I would say that's messing, like you said, it's messing with the truth. And I suppose it's truly believing this idea that we're assigned at birth.
I was just going to say, that's where that comes from. I think people who advocate for these types of birth certificate changes would say, well, sex assigned at birth, the whole thing is an ideology. And actually, all of us, quote, cis normies, are living in some sort of a warped ideology. And so I think it's almost like I wish this was framed appropriately as like the right to believe in a religion or something, because if you frame gender identity theories as a belief system, a religion, then you can advocate to say, look, this is my belief. I don't believe that children have a biological sex. And so I would like to raise my child according to our beliefs. Now, do I, as a therapist, think that is very well adaptive? No. But I think it's very interesting that the framing is likely based on the idea that actually all of us with our sex assigned at birth, we're all living in some sort of a matrix, and gender identity people are not. But to go back to non-binary, I think this is interesting context. But the average 14-year-old female who calls herself non-binary, she's not aware of all this certificate history and legal stuff. Yeah. What do you think is going on with these kids? Because I think a lot of very conforming, girly type girls, and I don't use that term in a derogatory manner, I mean just girls who have always had typical feminine interests, are calling themselves non-binary yet and really throwing their parents for a loop. And I think it kind of means I'm not like the other girls. Even though on the surface you may think I am, I feel different from them in some way. And I don't feel like I fit in with them. And I don't want to be treated like just some old boring cis girl.
And is it also saying, and I'm flagging, gender is causing me distress. I don't like the fact that boys and girls, and that we're not just like the way we used to be when we were children, and there was everybody together. Is the child who declares non-binary, are they is that what they're communicating when they communicate that? Are they saying, I don't like my developing sex really. I don't
Yeah.
like it. I don't want it. And I don't want theirs either. I don't want anybody's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, I think a lot of kids will say around, the end of elementary school or whenever they started to split kids up in PE or when
Oh,
they
yeah.
started to split us up by sex, I didn't like it. And that's how I knew there was something about gender that didn't feel right for me. And again, if we could just kind of hold that lightly, I say, yes, you're right. I get it. There is something really difficult about that recognition that there's a fundamental difference between males and females, even if it's just purely a body parts difference. And that can be distressing. And I think a lot of kids are like, no, I don't want that. It's almost like sticking your fingers in
Yeah.
your ears, closing
No,
your
no,
eyes.
no,
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 no.
no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that.
Yeah. Do you find, because I find in my clinical work, it's more girls are attracted to non-binary than boys. And I often wonder, like, as well, that there's a reason for that. And for me, the reason that I kind of interpret is that, when the boys and the girls start developing, the boys become bigger, faster, stronger, more, their voices are stronger, if you follow me. And I remember that I was like, Samson when he got his hair cut. As I went into puberty, all my great skills at punching and football and swimming and running were reducing as the boys were getting stronger and stronger with their testosterone. It was like an awful, tragic race. And I was just getting slower, if you follow me. Of course I was, because I was getting softer with estrogen as they were getting more powerful with testosterone. And I just wonder, is that it? That like when estrogen kicks in and the boys get the testosterone, the unfairness of the power of the testosterone makes the girls go, I'm out. I don't want this. Maybe that's
I think that's very possible. And again, because non-binary seems to encompass so many different kinds of kids, I'm sure that's true for some of the girls who, like you, really reveled in their power. And I mean, you've talked a lot about how your experience with gender had a lot to do with power and strength.
So. I'm not sure, but that's my 40-year hindsight analysis. Yeah.
Which is a good analysis, because I'm sure you have some more wisdom now than you did when you were a kid. But I also see girls who were never playing soccer or trying to be powerful with the boys or competing in that way in PE. I mean, there are lots of girls who are kind of artistic, creative, bookworms, not really that competitive. And when they identify as non-binary, like it almost seems like a fashion choice. Like there's these interesting haircuts and there's not shaving your arms, under your arms. And it's like being kind of unique, but in lots of ways, you're still quite typically feminine. So I don't know if you see that, but I see a lot of feminine girls. I mean, these are sometimes girls who are, at least in the kind of stereotypical ways of what we think feminine is, very soft-spoken.
Yeah.
Very
feminine.
very feminine, very much struggles sometimes to assert themselves. And I have talked a little bit in the past, I think online, about how I think some of these girls have never asked for anything from others. And they're very shy and they're very afraid to stand up for what they want. And sometimes they have a tendency to almost be pushovers in relationships and stuff. And I think asking to be called they, them represents like one of the first times where they try to assert their voice. And I think like in those cases, it's tricky, but I think those have to be handled very carefully, because in the context of the rest of her life, if she's very shy, very timid, and never asks for anything, and she asks for something, you can't just shut it down and make fun of it or laugh at it. I think that's really counterproductive.
Yeah, refuse it at your peril, because it could be a key point in the development of a strength in the kid. And yet I can see why it worries parents. So it's a horrible position to be put in. But I do think that these children with the non-binary identification, I think they're often kind of a little bit lost and a little bit people pleasy tendency.
Yes.
And I know Angus Fox said, a lot of young people are bisexual now to be polite because they want to include everybody. And I feel that the non-binary identification feels quite people pleasy, as in, oh no, I'm not rejecting anything. I'm all things. I'm neither this nor that, because I don't even want to categorize myself on any level. I just have to be everything to all people.
Oh my God, you're so right. Yeah. And another thing that happens when you take on a non-binary identity is you kind of dodge the judgment of trying to be either. So if you're worried about not fitting in properly as a girl and you're afraid of that judgment, but you also don't feel confident enough to call yourself a trans guy.
Exactly.
You can just say, well, I'm neither, so nobody can judge me in a way.
You can't get me on my lack of masculinity. You can't get me on anything because I'm non-binary. So so it feels like a really timid move, if you follow me. A really timid move that almost there's a lot more power and certainty and confidence in declaring to be a guy versus non-binary. It's like this squeaky little, I'm non-binary.
Yeah.
There's a sweetness to it and a gentleness to it.
It's so true. And I can't help but think that it depends on the person. So I'm thinking about, there's a couple of like male non-binary celebrity type activists. Like there's this one guy called Alok something or other. Do you know this guy? I think he's like an Indian American man.
Pop star. You tell me yours, and I'll tell you.
Well, Alok is this guy who, like, I think they think of themselves. It's so hard to call this person a they, because to me they're so male-like in the way they comport themselves. But he's some sort of like non-binary activist who seems to think that they are also a fashion icon. But I find that the things that this person wears are so off-putting and ridiculous. But anyway, I mean, he wears like dresses and like bright purple lipstick, but has like a ton of body hair and a man's haircut, and does all these little activist videos. But somebody like that who calls themselves non-binary, I don't think is timid at all. I think that is a person who loves attention and enjoys being the center of attention and likes telling people what to say and what to do. And I mean, I don't know this person. Perhaps they are just the most humble, wonderful, like modest person on the planet. But based on what I've seen, I don't think that's the case. So again, it's like so many different people who call themselves non-binary may have very different personality structures. It's hard to make a blanket assumption about what this means.
Yeah, you've made a liar out of me, and you're right. There's a whole cohort, there's a whole celebrity pop star. There's a well-known one called Sam Smith in the UK. And Sam Smith declared themselves non-binary. And, you do feel that they don't look non-binary. And I shouldn't go by looks, but God, on one level, this whole movement is very centered around looks. You know what I mean? And so, Sam Smith was born biologically male and is now they, them. And it's interesting, has won a few Brit Awards. Wasn't a very successful pop star, but certainly became very famous when they came out as non-binary. I certainly didn't know them until they became out as non-binary.
I'm looking at a picture of Sam Smith posing with this Alok person. So they're friends. Yes, I'll send it to you, and we can throw it up in the show notes. Anyway, go ahead.
So it's quite interesting because they won some Brit Awards for being a male pop star, because the categories are male and female, and there is no category for the out of binary
people.
So therefore, poor old Sam Smith isn't eligible for a Brit Award this year.
That actually is so sad, because Sam Smith is a very talented singer. I mean, I think Sam Smith is incredible. Yeah. Oh my God. Well, his voice is unbelievable. Anyway, their voice is unbelievable.
But can I just rest a little bit, or do you? Where I wanted to go is the they, because I think it's not something that could be passed by without reflecting, because it is making you plural. when you go to they, them, if you follow me. It's not, had non-binary chosen a different pronoun, which was, I don't know, some sort of mix of he and she or something, anything, I think I wouldn't have thought so much about it. But the fact that it went for the plural, there is something psychological going on. You're making more of yourself.
Wow.
You're playing with grammar, because I always, immediately when I heard about they, them, I went, well, am I saying they are or they is? Because I should really technically say they is. But when I say they is, people think I'm slagging them. And I honestly think, well, no, how do I denote that this is a singular, not a plural? And I think when you think of the plural, you're going for the plural, and then they've kind of got into a lot of identities, a lot of non-binary. We're talking about non-binary, but there's a lot of different variations of non-binary, and often it's about the they, them, the plural. And I'm like, well, what is that? What is the kind of source of that? I did look up, there's this gender census, 2021 gender census, 43,000 entries apparently, so it's quite big, this gender census. And the most popular pronoun preferences are they, them is by far the most, and then it's kind of he, him, she, her, and then it goes to no pronoun. That's the fourth most popular. So as in you will not use a pronoun on me. You have to.
So you just call the person, like it would be like me saying, "Hello, Stella. How is Stella doing today? Have you heard from Stella? What is Stella up to?"
Exactly.
Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that's the fourth. So there's they, them. The next most popular is she, her, and then he, him. Then mix it up. Then avoid pronouns. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's like a kind of self-report census, I assume. Just
yes, of course.
Preferences.
And I should know better than to.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because this is what people are saying. I mean, whether they're good at enforcing that in real life is a totally different story. But I mean, the fact that individuals are saying, I prefer no pronouns.
Yeah.
That would be challenging. And I think like the thing about these identities to me is that they require so much validation that they only function amongst other peers or colleagues or friends who are bought in.
But you can find your tribe. You can find your, because when somebody says, what's your pronouns, you found your tribe. So your calling card.
Yeah. And it's really, to me, it really speaks to this kind of culturally mediated version of identity, because if, just hypothetically, if we had no internet and you caught someone in kind of like, rural Appalachia or something, my guess is that nobody out there is just inventing the concept of non-binary identity on their own. This is, you learn about this, you read about it. The more you read about it, the more it fits. So it requires, whether you want to call it education or indoctrination, there's an argument to be made there, right? But these identities, as they crop up, really I don't think they spontaneously evolve. Yeah. I think they are created by a culture that is speaking about them, discussing them, sharing the idea of them.
Yeah, I do know, I live in rural Ireland, and I'm very surprised that non-binary is the identity that's taken off in my small town, which I certainly didn't expect. And my own daughter, like she's 13, so she's right in the middle of non-binary world, but she has managed to obtain a special exemption because she has explained to everybody that she's dyslexia. And in fairness, she does have dyslexia, although she's not allowed to use it. And she has used it, and she says she's got dyslexia, and so she can't cope with they, them, because it's too difficult for her to compute. And so she has an exemption, and so she's allowed to use she, her, or he, him. And I'm very proud. You gotta work with what you've got to work with in life, I think.
I love that story. I find it to be so lighthearted. Like, she obviously has a kind of sense of humor, but I mean, how does a parent like, I'll just kind of ask you,
Yeah.
your daughter's surrounded by people claiming they, them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Claiming non-binary. And my guess is she's probably at some level been curious about it, though I know you talk to her a lot about, identity and what that means. Can you give anybody tips on, like, if their kid is surrounded by non-binary identities and they don't want their kid to fall down a rabbit hole that may not be helpful, how do you safeguard from that? Because it's not like you've cut her off from those friends. She still has all those friends. So how does she kind of protect her mind from going down a road like that?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't dream of cutting her off from them because, these kids are forming their identities in their own way, and good for them. I think, I don't know that I've, she's very young, so, anything could happen, and I've no idea how things will unfold. But I do think so far the way we've managed it, there's been a lot of care and consideration, because I do speak a lot about it. So I was very aware that, I don't want to inflict my ideology. I don't want to inflict my beliefs on my kids. So I was very sparing in the way it was spoke about. For example, I didn't speak about gender in front of the kids very much at all until they started saying that other kids were non-binary. And then I gave myself freedom to speak about it myself. My husband wouldn't have before that. But the two big things I use is kindness and humor. And I center both of them, that there has to be kindness to anybody who's got an identity, and there has to be humor, because it is very funny to be saying they is and they that and they this, and you know what I mean. And the fact is, as my kid said, but there's no non-binary cats. She loves cats. No, there isn't, and we must think on that.
Well, we can't ask them, so we don't actually know, Stella.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't asked my cat, but I think my cat may be non-binary.
Your cat might be fuming in the corner saying, "Why don't you respect my pronouns, Sasha?"
Probably so. Because I do, if someone comes over and says, "Oh, your cat's beautiful, what's her name?" I kind of get defensive. I'm like, "It's a boy." Like, I do correct people. So what if my cat, okay, so before we go into like crazy land here with the cat genders, I think what stands out to me is that I think a lot of people who are adult, well, it may be both children and adults, but specifically adults. I think a lot of adults who call themselves non-binary in another generation would have simply just been gay.
Oh, yeah.
Gender non-conforming gay people. Look at somebody like Sam Smith. I thought Sam Smith was just not that Sam Smith is very gender non-conforming, but there's something about, their mannerisms or whatever that just to me reads like, if this was like George Michael-esque kind of male person. So I think there's like new words being used for things that have always been around under different labels.
I would have thought that they would have been in various generations. They would have been the beatnik, they would have been the punk, they would have been the new romantic, they would have been the curehead. Do you know what I mean? It's cultural. They've leapt into the culture. So in 1989, they'd have been wearing red lipstick, white makeup, and that black floppy hair. Do you know what I mean? And that this is a cultural kind of. It's a young culture. I shouldn't say teen, but it feels like very much a young culture thing, as opposed to anything more than that. But I wish it was more enjoyable. I wish it was more pleasant and fun and enjoyable, as opposed to a distressing, heavy, "you've got to respect my pronouns." I wish it was just a bit more free.
Like lighthearted.
Yeah, there's a heaviness to it.
Well, I think part of the reason there's a heaviness to it is because for some people, and I think I can't really speak for male people who are non-binary because I haven't really met any in real time. But for female people who are non-binary, I think that sometimes this stems from a place of trauma. Oh. I've met lots of female kids who have had some kind of aversive experience with a boy who was sexually aggressive or something like that, or maybe like a really overbearing boyfriend or something, and then the girl becomes non-binary. And so I think in that way, if non-binary identity is some sort of coping strategy for feeling disempowered or feeling less than or feeling like she wants to opt out, that's maybe why there's a heaviness to it for some cases at least.
Yeah. What do you think somebody should do if a young person in their vicinity, whether you're a parent or a teacher, what should you do when a child announces a non-binary identity? Do you know what I mean? Because a part of me thinks it could be a very benign exploration that could be very healthy. What's your feeling?
Yeah, it's so hard because you're totally right. Like in general, my approach is if you have a young teen and they start kind of experimenting with different identities, if you have a really strong relationship with the kid and you can, in an appropriate manner, help curate their environment and their situation, meaning, if they're on the phone 12 hours a day looking at trans TikToks, maybe curtail that. And if you can help them stay engaged and involved in their hobbies and their activities, whether it's sports or swimming, like in general, those are my kind of big picture order of operations things.
Yeah.
But I think like if you have a really strong relationship with the kid and you have some questions about their identity or some concerns, I think it's okay to talk to them about it. But because you can't really tell, like if it's benign or if it's going to lead down a pathway towards, really obsessive rumination or a fixation on medical stuff, it is very tricky. And I try not to give concrete advice unless I have a lot of context from the family to help me understand kind of like how all the puzzle pieces fit together. I don't know. I know that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's very hard to say because I think if you shut it down too quickly with too much force and you make the kid feel ashamed, that could go very badly. And on the other hand, if you're in a situation where you're trying to have a perfectly egalitarian relationship with your confused 13-year-old who doesn't know what she needs at the time, she can self-destruct in a way too, right? So like they're kind of opposite ways to handle it depending on the situation based on what I've seen.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, that's a really good answer. I think it's tricky. I think if you shut it down, you're in really tricky water, and I kind of don't really recommend you do. I think you need to take notice of the fact that the child is hanging out in trans world, and that has its own kind of huge concepts are going on. And I'm not convinced a lot of these kids who speak so polished, I'm not convinced they've really penetrated the issues. I don't think they often have. And so I would be very kind of conscious of, are they expanding their world or are they narrowing into an identity?
That's right. Are they getting into something that is overwhelming that they don't actually know how to get out of? Because, I often will say to parents, put yourself in the shoes of the child. If you're 13 and you just went through some sort of a crisis, whether your grandfather died or you lost your whole friend group or you've moved from one city to another, like there's something of instability going on. And then you are kind of invited to re-question your whole sense of identity. That is a big burden. And sometimes with the young teens, what they need is for parents to say, oh, honey, I see this is really important to you. I see that you're exploring, but we just need to really slow things down because I'm worried about how, unhappy you've been since you started to question these things. Like I think sometimes kids get in over their head and they don't actually know what to do. And sometimes parents kind of have to step in. It's like the example of if your kid is starting to hang out with a bunch of peers from school who are getting in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Do you just let the kid sort it out? Or do you say, okay, honey, you know what? I prefer for us to hang out with kids from swimming rather than those kids or whatever.
And it's amazing because parents feel very confident in acting in that case. But when it's something like non-binary, that they feel so disorientated by the words. They're like, what is non-binary? What do I not know? This kid seems to know so much more than me. And so the parents don't feel as confident as they would in other spheres. They know what they're talking about when they're talking about an unsavory group of kids. They do not know this. And so they hang back generally, kind of going, oh, right, this is something way beyond my sphere. And I think my kind of rule of thumb would be don't hang back. Go in, lean into this, find out about it, learn about it. Don't presume that the kid will tell you everything. Because I find so often kids are kind of leading the way and explaining quite patronizingly to the parents, this is the way it is. And the parents are taking it. And I think that's like you said, over egalitarian. I think the parent has to guide and therefore has to go about and learn about it so that they're not freaked out by the word non-binary, because it can feel intimidatingly weird and different.
One thing that comes to my mind is that perhaps parents can offer like a different way to understand non-binary. If you want to talk to your kids, perhaps you say something like, oh, I think that's really great. Gender non-conforming behavior is really freeing. Maybe you help them reframe it, because the word non-binary is really part of the whole lexicon of gender identity ideas. Yeah. And if you feel like the concept of gender identity can take a kid down a wrong track, which I think it can. I mean, I think there are times when maybe gender transition is appropriate for some people, but I don't think the theory of gender identity frees up anyone, to be totally honest. Like, the more I learn about gender identity, the more I think this is not helpful. So if you have a kid who's going down the gender identity path, maybe you help reframe what non-binary might mean in a different kind of framing, different context. And I'd like to ask the kid, what are some things about being a girl that you don't think fit you? What are some things about being a boy that don't fit you? And, that's just called gender nonconformity, just kind of bring it back down to earth in a way.
I also think I agree with you. I couldn't agree more with you, actually. But I also think that there's an opportunity with non-binary that I feel doesn't get taken up enough on. So that if a kid is, let's say, identifying as trans, and they say they're a femboy, or that they say they're trans mascot, or something like that, or pure a trans guy. I'm saying that way because it's very often that way, but maybe, the opposite. I think there's a real in for parents if they wanted to expand the child's mind and expand the child's self-awareness. I think there's a real opportunity to say, well, are you trans masculine? Because I think you might be more non-binary. And that can be a kind of an interesting, reflective, expansive conversation that can go back and forth. It doesn't have to be a challenging, oh my God, this is crap. You know what I mean? And I'm trans, why are you such a bigot? It doesn't have to be that head-to-head. It can be a much more reflective, I think you fit the kind of gender queer, or I think you fit gender fluid, or more than anything, non-binary. I think parents, personally, I think they should use it more as a way of reflective, that actually the child in front of you is more, frankly, androgynous. And therefore, non-binary actually fits more. But the parents don't even want to buy in at all, I would say. Yeah. They're like, no, I can't even think of this because I want to just get us out of this umbrella. Yeah. And I'm like, I honestly think that sidestep will be really helpful for the kid.
It's funny you say that, because there was a mother that I had consulted with many years ago who actually started a YouTube channel to give other parents advice on how to lovingly support your kid through gender dysphoria without necessarily affirming. Yeah, it was great. And one of the things that ended up happening for her is, in our consult, I said, look, you have to kind of decide, is your goal to destroy your relationship and talk your kid out of gender, or to stay connected and help work through it as a team, and that's kind of, I think sometimes those are really the choices you have. Sometimes parents think, I'm willing to sacrifice the relationship if I can stop them from transitioning. And I'm like, well, that's a false choice, because they might transition anyway, right? Yeah. So what this mother ended up doing is really trying to empathize with her daughter, her female child's distress, specifically around her breasts, right, and puberty and development. So they worked on, finding alternatives to binders. They ended up kind of going to get fitted for special minimizing bras that were safer for her body, but helped kind of give the appearance that she wanted. And mom really just tried to partner with her, but set a lot of structure around things like safety. And ultimately what happened for that girl, this was at least a couple years back, she stopped identifying as a trans guy and identified as non-binary. And the mom was very comfortable there because she said, at least my kid is not trying to destroy her old identity to become this brand new person. She's comfortable in a more fluid way. And I remember, I think in a comment section somewhere, parents were like, but that's not good. She's still non-binary. She's not identifying as a girl. And this mom said, you know what? She's on her own kind of trajectory here. And I'm comfortable with this place for her because she's taking good care of her body and she trusts me and tells me everything. And so they had really found a good way to kind of, I guess, compromise.
Yeah.
And I think the mom was very clever in her respect of the child's non-binary identity. Now, I don't think that she was using they, them pronouns for this kid, but
funny,
I think she was.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I think what she said is that, and I really like this framing. She said, we really value honesty, and it would feel dishonest if I was calling you they, because in my mind that's multiple people, but I'm going to do my best not to use she. I'll try to call you honey or snugglebug or whatever like the nickname was. So I think the parent has to trust their gut on this. There's no formula. And I think if you are compassionate and cooperative with your kid, you can set some structure based on what you think is best for them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's so interesting that the parent said that about authenticity and the pronouns, because I think pronouns can make people move into inauthenticity. If they start doing a pronoun that their body, their psyche, the parent's psyche is saying, no, this is the wrong pronoun and I'm using the wrong pronouns, that can cause an awful lot of fakery. And when you have fakery in a relationship, I think you're really on it in difficult territory. So I do think, while I love and I applaud the kind of the dropout, the no, the kind of rejection of the binary, of the non-binary identity, I respond not very well to the they, them aspect of it, because it's grammatically incorrect, because it grammatically sits weirdly, because it takes a lot of effort. And when you're asking for a lot of effort from somebody else, it feels passive aggressive.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think talking in an honest way with kids about you having to feel authentic and trying to compromise, like you don't want to make it seem like the parents' needs are the only needs that exist in the relationship. But I do think it's really important for young people to understand that, when you ask somebody to engage you a certain way, you might be kind of creating a dynamic that feels really unauthentic to the other person. And what's very interesting is that I know young people who are just like, the gender stuff is just in the air they breathe. They don't even bat an eyelash about they, them pronouns. They use it with natural fluidity. It's no big deal to them. And I find that really interesting. And they don't understand sometimes why it's so hard for parents. And I get why it's hard for parents, because it's not how I think we clock people's biological sex for the most part, especially if somebody has not medically transitioned. So your instincts, your gut, every part of you knows what a person's sex is. So it feels really hard to call a person they.
It's very interesting that you said that, because you can get linguistically used to anything. You really can. Most things, So I think you're right. So I suppose I haven't practiced enough, but I don't really believe in practicing something that doesn't feel right for me, because integrity matters. So why would I practice something that's just sitting wrong?
No, I agree.
They would say, well, you're practicing it for kindness. And I'd say, but it's not kind to me, because it's diluting my integrity. So we have to compromise. I think that's how communication and that's how relationships go. There is an implicit demand within my pronouns are they, them, because it's like you, the person in front of me, has to make more effort for me.
That's right.
And that doesn't sit well.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about the non-binary identity, which it goes beyond like a personal or internal sense of identity, right? Like it would be one thing if a person said, I don't think of myself as being really male or female, and that's how I'm comfortable understanding my experience. But when it's all about everybody else, like despite the fact, like I'm going to use myself as an example, despite the fact that I'm ostensibly a woman, I need you to help me concretize my sense of identity as not being a woman by using they them pronouns and not calling me she and not calling me a woman. So like I think that goes back to what you said about some people being so timid. It's like you don't fully believe this. That's why you need other people perhaps to validate it for you. You know, I wonder if there's an element of that for some people.
Yeah, it's true. It's
your
very,
face
very true.
Woo!
Yeah, wow, that was very interesting what you said there. I think you might be right. I presume many of our listeners have followed the case of Jamie Shupe, Lisa Shupe, and it's interesting. Am I right? It's interesting that like it's a male, biological male who went to the courts in the first place for the right to be non-binary because it feels like such a testosterone-driven, male, assertive action.
Okay, well, I did a little bit of research and you updated me that this person's case has changed. So just for anyone who doesn't know, there was an individual person born James Shupe in 1963. And this person reports that when he was a little boy, he was kind of berated by his mother for being sissy. And he subsequently, as a young adult or a teen, enlisted in the army, I think, or the military, served for decades. Then I think in in 2016, was the first legally recognized non-binary person. Prior to that, though, this individual had tried identifying as a transgender woman and tried medicalizing as a trans woman and felt that that didn't fit, and also didn't feel like he fit in with men, and then went to a non-binary support group or something in the early 2000s, I believe, and felt like, oh, non-binary people, that's where I fit. And what's really interesting is that I think like a year or two later, after legally becoming the first recognized non-binary person in Oregon, Jamie Shupe returned to identifying as a man and kind of became very well known, at least in gender critical communities and some right-wing media outlets, because Jamie Shupe said that all of this gender identity stuff is BS, essentially. And all of this is ideology. None of it was real. The whole thing was a sham. There's no such thing as non-binary. So this was a very interesting, kind of weird twists and turns that this person's life took. And I think you told me, Stella, that this person now re-identifies as a female or Lisa. As a woman, let's say, Lisa. Right? Male person identifying now as Lisa because Lisa was unable to get medical interventions if Lisa did not fit into the category of gender dysphoria. Is that right?
I'm not quite sure. This is literally only a day old as far as I know as news. But yeah, it seems to be that. And I have heard other people who've detransitioned who haven't been able to kind of medically or legally access what they need to access because there's a no man's zone. There's a kind of a nobody zone. And they're in the nobody. It's awful. It's just awful that they have to buy into an ideology to go forward. It feels all wrong. And like if they just said, oh, but I'm a bit trans-masked, they could get whatever the hell they wanted. But because they are saying, no, I'm not any of those things, I just want what I need. They can't get it. The nobody zone is what I see it as. And I think it's a terrible, terrible indictment on the situation. I do want to point out before we finish that, you know, the way we were squawking about the rises and the very sudden rises at the beginning of this podcast, you know, in non-binary, and it feels not insignificant that Jamie Shupe became the first legally recognized non-binary person in 2016. And the rise has happened. And that's when you go back to symptom pools, social contagion. It comes in, and my God, it's unbelievable when you look at the kind of milestones of famous Jazz Jennings, Caitlyn Jenner, Jamie Shupe. You can just track these identities. You really literally can track them on these famous people coming out quite loud. Now, I know Jamie Shupe wasn't loud. I know Jamie Shupe was doing their own thing. There was an awful lot of publicity around it at the time.
It's interesting stuff. It was really fascinating to explore this. I think we have in us another episode about babies. What do you think? Should we do that one of these days?
I think they do.
Okay, Stella. See you next time. Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens. This podcast is partially sponsored by RIME, Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics. RIME is a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the long-term care for gender-variant individuals. Visit rethinkime.org to learn more.
If you found value in our show, please review us on iTunes and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just go to our Linktree. That's Linktr.ee/WiderLensPod. Our discussions are for educational purposes only and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.